Want to sound more expressive, modern, and way more interesting over the blues? I've got 5 phrases you can drop into your solos right now, and you can download all of them in the free PDF I put together just for this lesson. In this video, I'll break down 5 modern jazz phrases that are designed to bring to life and add color to your blues solos. We'll cover sounds like the tritone substitutions, sequences, sidestepping, large interval leaps, and more. I'll play each phrase, explain exactly how it works, and show you how to use it in a standard 12-bar blues. And if that's not enough, each one is part of a blues etude that you can grab in full from the link below. Learning the notes is one thing, but how you phrase and articulate them is what makes the solo come alive. All right, let's go ahead and get started with our first phrase. All right, for our first phrase, we're utilizing tritone substitutions and sequences. And what you'll find throughout these phrases is I often kind of couple a couple of different elements throughout. Now remember that a tritone substitution is basically when we take the 5 chord, we go up a tritone, and we utilize that dominant chord. Remember, the thirds and sevenths stay the same, and that's the beauty of it, and that's why the tritone substitution works. It also creates that chromatic descending root movement in the bass line. Remember, a sequence is basically when you take a group of notes that has a certain intervallic relationship, and you basically start on a different note. So we're retaining the same shape and the same intervallic relationship. Now, we could have what we call a real sequence is where we've got an actual exact transposition of the intervals, or we could have a diatonic sequence where we're basically just taking the scale degrees that we would find in whatever that tonality or scale is and starting on different notes but retaining that intervallic relationship. I'm going to go ahead and play it real slowly. All right, let's jump right to bars 3 and 4 where we have our sequence and our tritone substitution. Now, I'm simply taking this shape that we find in our 5 chord, I'm basically taking that same shape and following it throughout, but utilizing the tritone substitution, which happens to be a half step away, in this case, from the previous notes that I started with. Let's check it out. Check out those last couple of notes. I'm basically just coming down either the altered scale or what would be the tritone substitution, that D flat 7. Notice I resolve from the 5th of the tritone substitution, which would be A flat or the flat 9 of our 5 chord, G7, to the 5th of our major chord, C major, so A flat to G. Remember, you'll find throughout these phrases that we really want to emphasize the resolution, because remember, music is all about tension and resolution, and we can really play anything as long as we convincingly resolve that tension. Let's look at it one more time, all together, just the sequence part. Remember, the important thing throughout all of these studies is that we understand the concept. So right now, we're utilizing the sequence and the tritone substitution. So if I understand the concept, I can begin to improvise and come up with something that's my own. Remember, we don't want to just simply regurgitate the phrases that we learn. We want to know what makes them tick so that we can then make them into our own phrases. So for example, if I were thinking about just that G7, and then I'm like, okay, maybe I go up a half step, and let's see if I can resolve it. I'm simply thinking about that half step movement, the tritone substitution. Now, you could also think of actually A flat minor 7. That's another way to think of up the half step that's going to give you the B natural or the C flat, which is the flat 7 of our D flat 7, our tritone substitution, which is the third of our G7. All right, let's check out phrase number 2. Phrase number 2 is a great example of sidestepping. Sidestepping can really be a half-step movement. It could be to any intervallic relationship. I could go up a minor third, I could go up a whole step, but here I'm actually going 3 half steps rather than simply just going up 1 half step, which I did in our previous example. Let's hear it real slowly. Now, this is taking place over the final 2-5-1 in the 12-bar blues. So this is basically bars 9 through 12. So I'm utilizing the sequence starting right on the 2 chord. And you'll notice that I don't do an exact transposition down a half step because I decided I wanted to utilize and retain some of the notes of A minor still. Let's check out just that first bar. Right? If I went down exactly a half step, I would have a C sharp on that last note instead of the C natural. So I thought that maybe that's a little more than I want to do. I still want to kind of convey that I know exactly where I am in the chords. Now, you could do the C sharp, and there's no problem with that at all. But I just decided to kind of retain the minor third of the chord. So if I really wanted to spell out what those arpeggios are communicating, I would have an E minor 7, which is a minor chord off the 5th of our A minor, to an E flat minor 6, and then down a half step to resolve to our D7. Now, that D7 kind of has the beginnings of an arpeggio, but I jump up to that B natural, which is the 6th scale degree, and then immediately down to the A. It's sort of kind of this upper neighbor. Let's hear what it sounds like. Now check out how I resolve that 5 chord. I simply come down utilizing the flat 9, which is E flat, and I resolve to the 3rd of our G7, or B natural. Let's hear how that descending root movement, the chromatic movement, works. One thing I also want to point out that a strong phrase kind of has this call and response element to it. You'll notice that the first half of the bar has sort of this call where I'm repeating myself, the descending arpeggios. And then the second half of that phrase is something different that kind of sums up what came before. Now, the response, of course, is something different that we want to contrast with the first part of our phrase. And in this case, I simply really strongly resolve by hitting the 1 or G of our G7. Let's hear it all together. Now, in phrase number 3, I utilize a device that I really like, which is basically creating 2 separate melodies. One that's kind of an upper voice, and then one that's a lower voice. And I basically try to retain the same intervallic relationship between the 2 voices. And oftentimes, I like to use what I call a melodic interval, which might be the major 6, for example. Let's play through it real slowly. Check it out, right off the bat, I'm utilizing 6th. And in fact, all of those large leaps are related by 6th. Some are major 6th, some are minor 6th. And I basically just want to keep in the key in this case. I'm not trying to go outside of the key or sidestep, but that would be a good idea to try and create a sequence that way. Let's look at that 5 chord and just isolate the upper voice. And now let's isolate the lower voice. Notice they have the same direction that they're moving in this descending motion. Now, this is really kind of borrowed from more of the classical tradition, and you hear this in Bach and Mozart and all of the real amazing classical composers all the time. Now, let's just isolate the upper voice of the one chord, or a G7. Here we're creating sort of this kind of pedal point, but instead of the pedal point being below, we've kind of got it above. Let's check out the lower voice. Now look at how I get into it. I actually utilize some of our altered notes. I utilize the sharp 11 or the flat 5, our D flat, and then the sharp 9 or the B flat. Let's hear it all together. Notice the large intervallic leaps that I continue with at the end of that phrase. We've kind of got this fourths movement type thing going. And then I continue that same idea into the next chorus. I also toyed around with the idea of playing a D natural instead of that E on the last part of that first bar of the next chorus. Check it out. It's another really good option. I couldn't really make up my mind, but I kind of went with the E because it's a little bit something different. It's more of a fifth relationship. Also notice again that the first half of this phrase kind of contrasts the second half of the phrase in two ways. One, in the way that it actually kind of moves a different direction. The first half is descending, the second half is ascending. And then of course our kind of response is that fourth relationship instead of our melodic major sixth or minor sixth interval. Let's hear it all together. Check out my online community, Next Level Sax, where as a member, you get access to an exclusive variety of information, including videos, weekly PDFs, mini lesson videos, monthly jazz etudes, access to all of my books, digital courses, masterclasses, personalized feedback, and of course, a supportive community where you can ask specific questions. Just click the link below to go next level. All right, let's check out phrase number 4. All right, in phrase number 4, it's all about triplets and sequences. I love to use triplets when we've got kind of this medium tempo. I feel like oftentimes it's a little bit underutilized, including with myself. So I have to constantly kind of ask myself, what is a subdivision that makes sense at a medium tempo that can create some forward motion and interest? And the triplets is usually a great answer. Let's play through it real slowly. Notice this is sort of the first instance in which we're utilizing the blues scale on the second half of that phrase. Now, this is very similar to our phrase 3 and the fact that I've kind of got this pedal point and 2 different voices. Let's look at that first measure. Now let's isolate the top voice. And the bottom voice is more of that pedal point. And I continue that same type of idea over the 4 chord, which is a great way to show that you have some intention behind your phrases, simply just to repeat it and change the notes to fit the next chord. Let's look at that 4 chord. Let's look at the top voice. And let's look at the bottom voice, or some sort of amalgamation of the bottom voice. Now, what really, of course, makes this phrase stand out from our previous phrase is the fact that we're utilizing the triplets. Now, a side note here for the saxophone players that when I get to triplets, it's basically a free-for-all as far as articulation goes. Now, in the rest of this kind of context, in terms of a swing or blues medium tempo, I'm going to tongue mostly the upbeats as well as breath accent. But again, for those triplets, it's more of a free-for-all. Let's hear those two measures put together. That's kind of my call and response in this phrase. Again, a way to show some real intentionality and coherence in a phrase is to maybe repeat something in the beginning and then do a contrasting response. Let's look at the contrasting response, which is the second half of our 4-bar phrase. I really love to use that melodic interval at the very end, the major 6, the B to G. That's such a great interval, especially in a blues context. Now, if we back it up just a little bit more, we've got more of that blues sound utilizing the blues scale. And then I'm into that same similar idea that I started with at the beginning of this phrase, which is really recapitulating the fact that I'm utilizing that kind of pedal point. Let's hear it all together. All right, let's look at our final phrase number 5. All right, phrase 5 is kind of this combination of large intervals that we looked at. So we've got some fourths and fifths in there, and then we've also got some sidestepping. Let's hear it real slowly. It's real obvious what that sidestep is. I'm simply going up a half step on the last half of that phrase. Let's look at the first part where I've got these large leaps. Check out that first interval leap. Again, it's our major 6, but this time I'm leaping down to make an even larger interval leap, and then I'm coupling it with some other fourths and fifths. Now, check out how I set up our sequence. I utilize some real pentatonic shapes over that 4 chord, the C7. And then I stay with those similar notes over the G7. Same notes that we found over the C7, and now I simply go up the half step and retain that exact intervallic relationship. Remember, it's all about utilizing the concept. So if I simply were to play around on that G7 and think again, up a half step, let's just take any sort of melodic intervallic shape. It's a great way to get outside of the key, communicate some altered notes, especially on that dominant chord, and especially when we've got more than one measure of the dominant chord. We want to create some interest, invite the other players in, say, hey, I'm going to put something out there that's got some tension. Why don't you give me something back? Let's hear the whole phrase one more time. Okay, a couple of practice tips that I want you to think about. Of course, when you're playing, always try to make music. Practice as though you are performing. Now, of course, we're going to have to go back and fix things, but if we go at our practice session as though we are really giving it our all, like we're performing, we're going to get more done in less time. Remember to utilize the upbeat or jazz articulation on all of these swing eighth notes, and of course, you want to use the breath accents to contrast your downbeats and upbeats. I find that the best way to really create a deep swing is to create more contrast between our downbeats and our upbeats. And of course, our upbeats are going to be the ones that we're accenting more. Not that we want to use a harsher tongue or more tongue. I keep the tongue legato no matter what, and I keep the fingers straight. If you want to learn more about that and really go in depth, check out my articulation video. These phrases are tools, but your sound is what makes them work. So be intentional with everything that you do. All right, so here's how I recommend practicing these phrases. I like to put a backing track on and just loop it over and over and over. And a lot of times this will work over just that one chord or the G7. But some of these phrases are over the 2-5-1. So you simply just loop that 2-5-1 over and over until you really get it inside your ears. Remember, everything that we do is ear training. It's all about training the ears to know where to go and to direct the fingers where to go. We want to build up that aural soundscape and that vocabulary that then directs the intention through the horn. Oftentimes, I will put the backing track on and loop it for an hour and just play that same phrase over and over until I feel like I've really got it. I want to really get inside the sound, think about my articulation and all of the details. And once I've really got it going, then I think about the concept. And I just want to take a bit of that phrase and start to manipulate it, start to make it my own. That is the goal, not to simply regurgitate the phrase, but to make it your own. And the sooner you can do it, the better. And by giving yourself the opportunity by looping over and over and over, it's going to happen faster. Along those same lines, combine two or more of the phrases. Start to mix and match. That's going to go much further than just taking each phrase as its own entity. We want to mix it up just like we do our words in our own vocabulary and our own language. The next step would be to transpose these into other keys. Really focus on those unfamiliar keys and think about a couple of ways to do this. Think about how can I do this by ear, simply not thinking about anything but really just listening to the sound, and then think about what are the intervallic relationships in terms of what are the numbers related to the chord. Those are both super important approaches that kind of combine to give you the ultimate result. Oftentimes I'll find myself in a sticky situation where all of a sudden I'm required to play something in a different key that I'm less familiar with, and I'll think about those numbers. Or when I'm improvising over a really familiar sound, I will just be listening to what the sound is and my fingers will go where I want them to. And of course, utilize the PDF as your guide. It's got many different concepts and approaches, so it's a great place to get started. And if you want to go even deeper into it, of course, you can always take these phrases and just simply change the rhythm. And that's going along the lines of making it your own. And then utilize those concepts. What if I sidestep on a triad pair? What if I sidestep on the 2 chord instead of just the 5 chord? Kind of combine all of those concepts. That's what we're really after. Another important tip that I want to give you is what really helped me is just writing out phrases. If you hold yourself accountable by putting it on paper or on the notation program, you're able to really look at what am I actually hearing, what am I actually playing, and then you can of course edit, and that's the beauty of writing it down. You can actually come up with what is your ideal phrase or your ideal solo, and you learn so much in that process. A combination of all of these ideas is how you go from copying to creating your own voice. All right, we talked about sidestepping, tritone substitutions, some pentatonics, how to create more coherent statements utilizing call and response. We even talked about how to create some more rhythmic tension by utilizing triplets. Each one is a doorway into a different sound, and now you can make it a part of your toolkit. If this video gave you something useful, hit that like button and consider subscribing for more lessons like this. Drop a comment below and let me know which phrase is your favorite, or tag me in a solo utilizing them. And don't forget to grab your free PDF in the description. Keep practicing, keep exploring, and I'll see you in the next video.